Common complaint from many new players is the lack of guidance once the initial tutorial is completed. So much necessary information just couldn't be found in-game. And let's be honest, the codex isn't very much help. The main source of information for the average player comes from the extremely well-documented Warframe wiki. However, I'd rather not have an outside source be required for basic information, so the more the game tells you, the better. To an extent, of course. So I wanted to try and make a few videos where we take a look at some key aspects of the game and see how well a game does at guiding players in these regards. Starting in this video with what I'm sure most could agree is the biggest concern, dealing damage. Warframe is a horde shooter, so dealing damage is a key part of the gameplay loop. So how easy is it to learn how to deal damage? Well, damage in Warframe is not as straightforward as it may seem. I mean, yeah, shoot gun, hit target equals damage number. But to get the most out of your weapons, there are so many other factors to consider. In fact, the actual damage formula is as follows. That's quite a lot. And that doesn't even cover the status effect damage, where there's a different formula for each status. These formulas are not really shown in-game, obviously, but it's not like the game tells us nothing. So if we were to open up the modding menu for any weapon, we are greeted by this. It shows the amount of damage you do with a single click of the weapon, taking into account the mods you have on. However, it doesn't really tell you how it gets to that number, and you could easily point out inconsistencies if you actually bother to pay attention. For instance, 90% for physical damage types like slash does not give you the same amount of damage for 90% in elemental damage, like, let's say, heat. There's also faction damage, which not only increases your direct damage against certain enemies, but it also increases your status damage. And since the damage of the actual hit is considered when determining the damage of the status effect, it effectively double dips for status damage. DE did go out of their way to label faction damage differently than most damage sources, but it still does a pretty poor job at explaining how it's different. Especially now that we have mods now that directly increase status damage, I don't see any reason why Bane mods shouldn't just have both effects listed. And then there are damage bonuses that are labeled the same yet function completely differently. For instance, a rank 9 Serration and a rank 2 Longbow Sharpshot are both labeled as plus 150% damage. However, in practice, they function completely differently. You see, some mods, like Serration, apply bonuses additively, adding a percentage of the weapon's base damage value to the total damage. However, some bonuses, like Longbow Sharpshot, are multiplicative, and those multiply the damage after some or all other bonuses have already been calculated. Despite these bonuses being calculated way differently, they're labeled the exact same, and the only way to figure out how each bonus works is through trial and error. Similar discrepancy can be found in regard to critical chance. While most mods add a percentage of the base critical chance, there are some bonuses like Arcane Avenger that add a flat bonus, which is significantly more beneficial on weapons with low base critical chance. Just like with damage bonuses, you would have no idea how certain bonuses work until you do your own research. The only exception I could think of would be Mesa's Ballistic Bullseye Augment, which calls the crit bonus Final Crit Chance, which I think is a perfect distinction, and I'm surprised other flat bonuses don't have it labeled as such. And just to shoe in one more admittedly niche complaint that I have, let's talk about Railjack's damage system. Because for some reason, Railjack has its own unique set of status effects. And yes, I specifically mean Railjack, because Arcwing missions, despite also being in space, use the normal status system. Railjack missions use the same damage types as the rest of the game, but the status effects are all different. Some of these effects are pretty unique, but others are effectively just statuses you're already familiar with. And of course, to make things even more confusing, these new status effects are not explained anywhere in the Railjack Arsenal screen. Hovering over the damage types talks about their effects in regular missions. Additionally, Arc weapons inherit the new statuses in Railjack, but the system is so half-baked, the combined elements, which I assume most people use, don't have Railjack effects, so most players just end up being unable to do status effects with their Arc Wings outright in Railjack. Okay, that's a lot of seemingly very important information the game doesn't tell you. But that's not to say the game tells you nothing. In fact, the Arsenal and weapon stat pages have become way more informative over the years. For instance, weapons with unique properties have their quirks listed here if applicable. Hovering over status chance shows the chance of each individual status a weapon could inflict. And now 4 status procs are shown in both the status chance portion of the modding screen as well as in the melee combo menu, where it also shows the damage multipliers as well. There's one part of the screen that has been incorrect since before I started playing the game! But as much as things have improved, it simply is not enough. Especially now that DE has been giving us more and more late game content, knowing how to properly damage enemies past sortie level has become increasingly more important. While I'm not entirely sure of the best way to approach this, having all this inconsistent wording and insufficient information be addressed would be greatly appreciated. And considering all the quality of life and early game changes that we're getting, I'm rather confident that this subject will be addressed at some point as well. If you made it to the end, thank you so much. Especially since I'm completely new to all of this, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch me ramble. This was originally going to be one big video. Between my inexperience with all of this, my old laptop fucking exploding, and me just being a lazy piece of shit in general, I decided to split this into 2, possibly even 3 different videos. Because otherwise this would never get done. Warframe's lack of provided information is something that I don't think is talked about nearly enough, and I think it's becoming more of an issue as time goes on. And while I think dealing damage is certainly the biggest offender in this regard, it's still far from the only one. There are 2 other major areas I would like to talk about in future videos where the lack of information actively hurts the game. Those being general guidance both in and out of missions, as well as story presentation of all things. So keep an eye out for that. Or not, I don't tell you what to do.